Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are listening to us from. Happy Tuesday. This is James Eastham, along with my co-host Danielle Heberling, here to talk to you about all of you. In episode 3 of the Believe in Serverless podcast, we're going to cover everything that happened last week from July 29th to August the 4th. Let's jump into it. If this is your first time listening, as a reminder, this podcast is here to catch you up on what you might have missed. We're going to cover the best conversations from the Discord community, answer any of the pressing questions that went unanswered, and discuss the live sessions that happened last week and some of the things that we found most interesting about them. But before we get into all of that fun stuff, let's first thank our sponsor for this week's episode. This week's sponsor is Memento. And if you're not familiar with Memento, they're an enterprise-ready serverless infrastructure platform with caching, event messaging, and storage services. Memento is a pay-as-you-go platform with instantly available cloud resources that elastically scale to meet even the most demanding workloads. You can get started today by going to console.gomemento.com. Thank you to everyone at the Memento team for sponsoring this episode of the podcast and for your ongoing support of the Believe in Serverless community. Thank you for that. And awesome. Now that we've got through that, Danielle, how are you doing today? Welcome. I believe this is your first time here, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm doing great. First time here. Morning for me, evening for you. So we're drinking different drinks.
Yeah, I'm actually on water. I'm keeping it sensible for this. I thought, trying to do this after a few drinks could be more fun. Actually, that could make quite an interesting podcast.
It might be, yeah.
And things might be a little bit crazy this week, by the way, if you're listening, because this is the first time we've stepped out of the safe pair of hands, which is Alan Helton hosting the episode. So if things go a little bit crazy, then don't worry, people, stay with us. It'll all be good. And the first thing we like to do on the podcast is welcome the new members in the Discord community. And it's still growing at a crazy pace. I don't know if you've noticed this, Danielle, but we've got another 10 new members this week, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it's been great to see all the new folks. If you haven't introduced yourself, you should definitely introduce yourself to us in the intro channel.
You definitely should, because we're going to say hello to all of you right now. And apologies in advance, because I'm going to try and pronounce what are Discord usernames. So this could get a little bit crazy. But welcome to Thomas Lockney, to Neandir, to Coconut Cranky, Wiccan, Heem Brian, Andy Hats, Dens, CPC Wood, Vegal POXOO, I guess that's how you pronounce that, and Julie Ferrario. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. And we look forward very much to hearing from you, learning from you, and listening to the kind of things you want to talk about. So welcome again to all the new members. And if this is your first time listening, this is where we like to get into some of the highlights from the community last week and from the wider serverless world. And I think one of the biggest stories of last week, I suppose, and it certainly raised some discussion inside the community, was the announced depreciation of AWS Code Commit, Cloud9, and a few other AWS services. And the way this was kind of handled by AWS was just to not let people create new things. So you couldn't just go and create a new code commit repository, but not actually really tell anybody that it was happening. Have you ever used any of them services, Danielle? Actually, Code Commit, Cloud9, rather than other services that were included in that depreciation?
Some of them I actually never heard of. I forget the names of two of them, but yeah, with Code Commit, I have used Code Commit very briefly. I also use Cloud9, particularly for those AWS workshops, which is why I was a little surprised to see it go.
Yeah, for me, having worked at AWS, to see Cloud9 is like, oh, okay, that's interesting, because I think every workshop I ever built used Cloud9 whilst I was at AWS. So it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I hope employees got a heads up at least, because that seems like a lot to update, is my thought.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, for me personally, I always thought Code Commit was a little bit odd, because when you've got services like GitHub that already exist, GitLab, even things like Azure DevOps, I always find it, Bitbucket as another one. I find it odd when companies release like a a GitHub-esque service. I'm like, well, GitHub.
Yeah, I feel like myself and companies that I work at, like we just weren't really the target customer for that because like my very limited use of it was like I was building a dev tools and we had a customer that wanted to use code commit. So that was like just me using it to test it out for the customer. And like I think it's probably really good for like enterprise, like if they want to have a quick, like allow list of like they don't have to go around and ask, can I use this service? But yeah, my personal take on it was like you get a much better, richer suite with like GitLab, GitHub, things like that. But
yeah, I mean, I think my use of it was once. I think I once used it. I think for some reason I was using code build and code deploy. I was using like the full suite of services,
oh
and
yeah,
it was easier to trigger code build from a code commit repo. But I think actually all I did was set up like auto clone, so I'd still commit to a GitHub repo, and then it would
oh interesting.
auto clone into it. I'm sure that's how I did it. I might be
Hmm.
talking absolute rubbish though. So if you're listening to this and that's not a thing, then sorry. But I'm sure that's how I work because it was easier to do the integration with code build. So just cloning, syncing the repo into code commit, and then it just kicked off the workflow from there. But yeah, I agree with your take completely. Like it's not so sure. But then it's interesting that
Yeah.
again, like with code catalyst, which is another one of these like CI/CD code committee type services. It's interesting that I think if code commit is going away, but code catalyst is around. I mean, I've never even heard of anybody using code catalyst. I don't know. I don't know if you've ever seen people using it or any people you've worked with have actually even looked at code catalyst.
Yeah, like I was hearing the rumors about, you can't create a new code commit thing. So I wanted to test it out myself. And when I got the pop-up, it recommended that you use GitHub, GitLab, or code commit. And yeah, I second your thoughts about Code Catalyst because like I've used it for like a team project with the community builders. But aside from that, like I've never heard of anyone else using it, but I might possibly live in a bubble as well. Who knows? But
Yeah, living our enterprise GitHub, lovely bubble. Again, I just think it's hard when like GitHub exists. GitHub is so widely used. You can use GitHub for like private repos, enterprise repos, and even GitLab. I've used Bitbucket with quite a few companies. The whole Atlassian suite, like I don't know. Personally,
yeah,
I
like
find it a bit
even
odd.
like the login to me, like this may be getting too deep into the weeds, but like they have a separate like splash page. Like you don't log in from the
Oh,
console.
really?
Yeah. And you
Ah,
also have to log in with your builder ID, which seems a little disjointed from like my other AWS experiences. So that's why I'm wondering like how many new users they would get through this
hmm.
versus people just being like, I'm going to GitHub.
I always assumed it was like just like AWS SSO type login where you'd have like your kind of SSO landing page and you could just like drop into Code Catalyst from there. So it's a completely. I didn't know that. I didn't know it was independent.
They might have enabled SSO. Yeah, how we logged in with my group though was builder ID, but we were also kind of like earlier users because Johannes, if you know him, he was in the group. He was kind of the driving force of why we were code catalysting.
Your Code Catalysting. So yeah, I mean, I think the summary there is Cloud9 is definitely a big surprise if that's going away. I mean, it just seems like a useful service.
Yeah.
I think when I was getting started with AWS, I don't think Cloud9 existed, but I hear a lot of like new to the cloud, new builders, people find it quite useful because you can get started with AWS without needing anything installed, right? You can just do it all inside the console. So yeah, I think that's the one for me where I'm like, that's surprising. And I would be interested to know,
Yeah.
maybe I should reach out to some of my ex-colleagues and find out if anybody knew that was coming because yeah, that would be interesting.
I hope so. Yeah.
I would hope so as well.
Yeah, my impression with Cloud9 is, and this might be incorrect, but I felt like it started because it was a startup that was acquired.
Ah,
But maybe I'm mixing up my
possibly.
services. So people listening, if I'm wrong, definitely fact check me.
Yeah. We value being called out on this podcast. So please, just don't cancel us. Just reach out and
Yeah,
friendly.
no canceling.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, that was certainly the biggest news from last week, I think. But there was another really interesting article that was shared inside the community from EAL that was a Medium article talking about container orchestration versus functions as a service. And for me personally, I think this is quite an interesting conversation. I think as I've got longer and longer in the tooth using serverless, I suppose, I think I've started to become more and more relaxed about like what actually serverless is. And I actually think, things, if you can run containers in a way that minimize your operational overhead, then is that serverless? Is that not? That's probably a conversation for a whole other podcast. But I'd be curious, Danielle, with your your experience actually being hands-on and building things. Like, how do you kind of look at this containers versus functions kind of way of looking at things?
Yeah, it's always an interesting conversation. Like every few years, I think it always comes out of the woodwork. And I just kind of like the attitude of, serverless first, but also best tool for the job. Because, yeah, even at my company, like current day job, we're very much serverless first, but there's some stuff that like Lambdas will be running for every 15 minutes. So then we switch over to Fargate. We don't go the Kubernetes way, like this article, but
I mean, you're not allowed to say that on this podcast. You do know that, don't you? That's the K word.
I want to say it twice, but I get kicked out. Yeah.
yeah. Two strikes, third strike, and you're gone.
Google juice, you say it 3 times, and
yeah. So actually, when I was on the live streams last week, I was talking to Mahmoud from Neon, who we're going to hear from in a little bit. And right at the start of that conversation, we were talking more generally about serverless. And he was talking of his idea of the "it just works" spectrum. So you've got at one end of the spectrum, you've got "it just works," which will be Lambda, and at the other end of the spectrum, you've got EC2, where it doesn't just work. You've got to do a lot of stuff yourself. And really, as a developer, you want to be as far right on that "it just works" spectrum as possible, which I quite like the view of, actually.
Yeah, I watched that too, and yeah, I really liked his take. I've heard people talk about, serverless spectrum and things like that. Like, I think that started with Ben Kehoe's blog post he wrote. But yeah, I never heard about like the "it just works." That was pretty cool. But yeah, I feel like I would caution, like, you don't want too much magic. Because sometimes if you have a real specialized use case, but maybe I'm bike shedding too much here.
No, I mean, I think I'd completely agree with that. Like, I think it's something I always like to do, and I think I've heard Jan Kui talk about this as well, about always understanding like a level deeper than the abstraction you're operating at. So like, I like to understand how Lambda works under the hood so that I know what's good for Lambda, what isn't good for Lambda. And I think once you understand that level of detail, like you said, you've got some workloads that don't fit the Lambda operating model, and that's okay. I think it's when you become militant about everything has to run in Lambda that's when you start getting yourself into trouble, I think, personally.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I tend to agree with that. It's like you shouldn't serverless just to serverless. You should use it because it's a good tool for you and your team.
Yeah. Unless it's the K word, then there's use cases for that as well. I actually talked about this with Mahmoud, actually, and I think one of the best, when I was still at AWS, we had a memo came around before reInvent. I think it was 2 years ago, and it's the best heuristic I've heard yet about Kubernetes, and it's if your ability to dynamically scale infrastructure is a core differentiator for your business, then Kubernetes is a good tool to use. Otherwise, you don't want any of that responsibility. Like Neon use Kubernetes heavily behind the scenes, and that makes sense because they're like dynamically scaling all this weird and wonderful, what I imagine are EC2 instances behind the scenes are similar, like all these different sizes and instance types. Yeah, that kind of
it's a very unique service that like not every software as a service is doing what Neon's doing. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, Datadog use Kubernetes behind the scenes, and that kind of makes sense because you've got all this ingestion that's dynamically going up and down. And I'm like, yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense. But yeah, for Joe Blogs who's building an internal enterprise app that's a CRUD app against a database, then yeah, there's a company I was working with before I left AWS who were building Kubernetes clusters, and they wanted to run when you go to like you visit an office and you have to like log in when you get there, like sign in, like I'm Danielle, I'm here to see James, and they wanted to run that, build a whole Kubernetes platform to run an app like that, and I'm like, seems like a waste of resources. But okay, cool. You do you.
A lot. Yeah, I see that in the serverless world too, though. It's like, sometimes I'm trying to think. like in terms of feature flags, it's like you could use the AWS service, or you could just pay for what's that company? I'm losing the name.
Launch darkly.
Yeah, Launch Darkly.
Yeah.
It's like, which one is more serverless?
Yeah.
Depends on your definition of serverless, but yeah, it's like I see that in serverless too. It's like, oh, I could build this myself.
Yeah.
But
I think most software engineers I know have been there where they've been like, I could build that myself. And I think it's at least for me, it's a lesson I learned reasonably early on. It's like, if there's something I can buy that will do as good a job, then I'm probably going to buy it rather than build it, because
yeah, and like you can rely on it, because like you definitely don't want something with outages all the time, or like a company that's going to close tomorrow, like within reason, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the last thing actually that I thought I saw in the community last week that I thought would be interesting to touch on, and this is probably going to be quite a brief section, but the question was asked about AWS account numbers, and I think I see this come up quite a lot on the internet. Are AWS account numbers sensitive information? Or are they not? Danielle, go.
Yeah, I mean, the AWS official stance is no, as Alan pointed out in the thread, so I won't take credit for that. But it does kind of feel like, it's not something you can change. Like you can change your password, you can deactivate like keys, but you can't change your account number. So that is one thing that's slightly concerning if you are sharing it with folks, because you can never take it back. So
yeah, one of the things I quite like when I set up all of my own personal AWS accounts, I set up like AWS organizations and full like AWS SSO, Google logins for my own personal accounts. And when you log in with a personal account, you don't actually get your account ID in the top right. You get your whatever name you're logged in as. And I'm like, okay, this makes me feel just a little bit more comfortable when I'm doing like content for YouTube, because it's not there. But then I'm with you on that. I think it's maybe try and hide. And I think it was pointed out in the thread. I can't remember. I think it was Gary who pointed out in the same thread, like you should hide it if you can, and try not to share unnecessary information. Maynard flies. Sorry.
Maynard flies. Yeah.
Yeah. Practicing good operational security. So yeah, keep them hidden if you can, people. The next thing we like to do on this podcast is to try and address any unanswered questions that that went past in the community that may have been missed, that may have been lost in the thread of everything flying around and all the cool things that are happening. And actually this week, I was quite impressed actually. There wasn't an awful lot of unanswered questions that came up. There was, which is good. I mean, it's not so good for me and you having to find something to talk about now, Danielle, but there's, for the community in general, I think it's an awesome thing that there's all these questions being asked and there's people responding in real time and people are getting answers to the things they're struggling with. But there was a couple that there was one that you pointed out that we should probably mention. So Alan posted a question in there about whether a Believe in Serverless blog would be useful. And if you didn't see that poll, it'd be really interesting actually if you're listening and if you're in the Discord community. If you do think a blog would be useful, something that'd be helpful for you to repost your own content or to see original content, then please let us know, because it's something else we're considering and we'd love to hear from you if you think that's something that will be useful to you. And the other question that came up though, which I think we could probably have more of a discussion about, was about Lambda response streaming. Now, obviously, this is a feature that I think Lambda released 18 months ago, would you say?
Yeah, it was like a year or two ago. That sounds about right to me.
And there was a bit of discussion about whether anybody's used it, whether they found it useful. Now, me personally, I've never actually used it because I'm from a .NET background, and at least as far as I understand, it's only available for Node right now, is response streaming. But I don't know if you've ever used it, Danielle, because you are a Node developer, aren't you? I've not made that up completely.
Yeah, I do mostly Node and TypeScript because it's what I'm paid to write. My favorite programming language is what I'm paid to write. So
I like that. I've never heard that before. That's a really good rule of thumb. I like that.
But yeah, actually, I have never used it. I've looked at, a lot of the great examples and blogs. Like I believe Jones recently wrote a really good one. You should totally check that one out. But yeah, it looks mostly like it's just using a lot of built-in Node functionality, like within the runtime. And I guess maybe what AWS did on their end was to just, make it be workable with Lambda.
Yeah, I think I've seen some useful stuff around like Gen AI and like streaming to get that kind of, chat GPT-esque typing along as it's thinking functionality. I think you would need response streaming to do that, because when I've built things with Bedrock in the past, like you kind of send your call to your Lambda, you wait for Lambda to receive everything back from Bedrock and then send it back. This is me in my rudimentary .NET world. But I guess for that Gen AI kind of, I'm typing while I'm thinking, I guess you would need response streaming for that.
That was my read on it. Yeah, and like it's great to just get, like a line at a time. Because it's like I know I'm pretty impatient. Like you wait, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and then all of a sudden it's like big blob of text. It just seems like it'd be a much better user experience, is my opinion. So
I'm sure there are other use cases. I think maybe we're all slowly being turned to thinking about Gen AI about everything, because that's the only use case I can think of at the minute is like streaming. I suppose like if you were loading a web page, if you're doing like server-side rendering, you could maybe like part load a web page as the web page loads. Maybe it'd be useful for things like that.
yeah, maybe.
I've been interested to see
I'm
what.
working on that.
There we go. There we go. A use case. I've been interested to see what Luca Mezzalino maybe thought of it, because Luca obviously does a lot of stuff around like macro front ends. I wonder if there's some use cases in like the front end world, maybe like rendering stuff. But
yeah, if you're doing like server-side rendering, but you only want to render, you don't want to block loading the whole page type of thing, maybe. I'm not sure. Yeah.
No. Well, if you are using Lambda response streaming, come and let us know, because it'd be really cool to hear what you're building. Because
definitely.
rendering, awesome. So that was the minimal amount of unanswered questions we had this week, which is again really cool that there's such a I don't know. I find every time I log in there's always like new conversations happening. I kind of get excited. I get the little dopamine hit now when I log in, and I'm like, "Ooh, something new happening in the compute channel. That's exciting." So yeah, it's cool to be part of such a vibrant community, I think. So the last part of this podcast is where we look at all the live streams that have happened in the last week. Now, if this is your first time coming across the Believe in Serverless community, or what we do every week, we tend to run, it's a varying number of live streams. Last week was particularly busy. I think there were 5 live streams last week.
Yeah, you were busy. You were hosting a lot of them.
Yeah, I think I took 2 last week. I don't know. I find it really good though, because I don't know if I like see like a YouTube video that I want to watch, I'll add it to my watch later, and then I never really go back and watch it, and I've got this massive backlog of watch laters on YouTube. Whereas I find actually hosting them, it's like I have to be present, I have to be here, I have to listen because I'm hosting it. So it's a really cool learning experience, I find, to do that kind of stuff. So yeah, there's live streams happening every week, and this part of the podcast we look at some of the things that came up in the live streams, some interesting things, and we talk about them. So the first one I wanted to bring up today is from Mahmoud. And Mahmoud is a developer advocate at Neon. If you're not familiar with Neon, they're Postgres. I think they said they're a serverless Postgres, but then we had this whole conversation about serverless. I think they use the word managed Postgres as opposed to serverless Postgres. So sorry, Mahmoud, if I've just absolutely ruined all of your hard work in the marketing side of Neon. They're a managed Postgres company. Let's hear what Mahmoud had to say about how the back end of Neon works. It's kind of cool.
In Neon, it's a distributed system where you have the storage and the compute separate. So compute, you can think of it as this is what runs Postgres, and that's why we can actually shut it down. Because again, if you tell someone like, hey, the database shuts down, they're going to be like, okay, but what happens to the data?
Yeah.
That's where it's like, it's different on Neon. But you still get the same exact experience when you're running Postgres, pretty much.
And to follow that up immediately, because my first question when Mahmoud said that was, well, cold starts. Like, I mean, as a serverless community, I think it's the most common conversation we all have all the time, more so than we probably need to, is around cold starts. So my immediate question there was, what about the cold starts? So let's find out what that means for cold starts.
The time it takes for the database to spin back up is actually around 500 milliseconds. So
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. That's like if you have, like, the thing is, if you, like, this sort of thing doesn't matter a lot in production use cases, because typically you'll have the app running all the time.
Mm-hmm. 500 milliseconds to start up a database.
It's pretty impressive.
It's
Yeah.
very, very impressive. And I mean, it was interesting here when we talk about how that they put a lot of time into that kind of developer experience, in a sense of if you're developing a new feature, you can actually open a branch and you can actually branch your database, and then you as a developer have got a complete branch of your database, complete copy of your database ready in 500 milliseconds to use, and then you step away and it auto scales to 0, and then when you come back again after your 100th meeting of the day, you come back, and then because it's only the compute that needs to scale up, the storage is still sat there. You're 500 milliseconds, you're off and working again. And then the same in the other direction in your production use cases. If you get a sudden burst of traffic, 500 milliseconds and your database is scaled up. So I just found that super, super interesting. I mean, it's something whenever I've worked with like Postgres or relational databases in the past, it's one of the things I've always struggled with, is that both scaling the database and also managing it when I'm not using it and having to delete it and then wait for RDS to create a new instance, which takes 10, 15, 20 minutes sometimes.
Yeah, I know with like very serverless heavy apps, like a lot of times like the serverless can auto scale, but then your database doesn't. And then it's like, then the database turns into a bottleneck. That's happened at so many places for me. And yeah, just watching this, it's like this talk could have very easily just been like a real strong, just like vendor pitch, but I really like just how conversational, how educational it was, and just learning how they're thinking about it and what kind of pain points they want to solve. And yeah, the branching definitely seems super helpful.
Yeah. And there was another clip that I didn't actually pull out, but in the live stream, they also talk about how Neon as a company, they've got a set of GitHub actions that they manage. So if you want to, build some functionality where when you raise a PR, you want to automatically create a new branch of the database, run your integration tests, and then delete the branch of the database afterwards, they have GitHub actions that will do that. Okay,
that's awesome.
Yeah, that's developer experience. Like if you're managing GitHub actions, then I'm like, okay, that's because I've been there, like, as I'm sure you have, like where you need to do something. You're like, right, which CLI commands do I need to run in which order to make sure that I get this thing in the right place? And so yeah, I think that's really, really helpful.
Or even the issue of like Joe123 created this GitHub action. It looks like it's fine, but like I have a lot more confidence when it's like actually backed by the company that it's helping you use. So
yeah, I'm so glad you've said that, because I've been there. It's like, wait, what? Joe123?
It's probably fine. I don't know.
The GitHub repo hasn't had a commit in 4 years.
Is Joe going to update this to node 20? I don't know. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we've all been there, I'm sure. So yeah, I mean, like you said, the conversation, I would really recommend going and watching that back, because actually, I think it's, for me, this is how, when I was at AWS, this is how I always tried to talk when I was an AWS employee. Is like, I don't want to talk about AWS services. I want to talk about the problem that the people have who I'm talking to, and then actually the last 5-10 minutes of the conversation might be about Lambda, it might be about SQS or SNS or whatever that might be. And I feel like Mahmoud did a really good job of that, of making it about the problem and Neon.
Yeah. I loved how it was question driven too. I mean, I'm sure he probably had, an idea of maybe what he wanted to talk before joining the call, but like, it just seems so more conversational, so more seamless when it's like, you would kind of interrupt him and be like, but what about this? And then it would just like, did you two plan that ahead of time? Because that just seems really good.
Nope. So I mean, I turned up thinking it was going to be like a presentation. Most of the live streams we do are guest comes on, talks for n number of minutes,
slides, yeah,
exactly. And then we got there, and he was like, "Oh, no, that I've not got anything like that." But I went to the conversation. I was like, "Okay, well, we just we fly by the seat of our pants and we make this work." So I mean, it helps when it was something I'm personally interested in. Like, I was a DBA for a little while, so I'm quite interested in databasey stuff anyway. And then when the technology is actually really cool, it does kind of help it make an easier conversation for sure.
Yeah, it seems awesome. I definitely want to try it out. I think the one deal breaker for me is he said they didn't have private link yet, but it sounds like they're working on it. So deal breaker for using it at work. So
yeah, I think I said that. I think I posed the question to him, because I think most companies I've worked with, even medium-sized exposing a database on a public URL, even with IP allow listing or block listing. I'm still like, I don't know of any companies that are going to let you do that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, it feels a little icky to me, but I mean, at least they have the IP allow listing for now. It's better than nothing. So I feel good using it for personal projects right now. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when I think about every 3-tier AWS architecture diagram I've ever seen, the database is always in an isolated subnet with no access to anything. So yeah. But they'll get there, right? They're a reasonably new service. They've got a lot of underlying tech. I feel like adding stuff like that is probably less difficult than building the actual platform itself and proving out the platform. So
first things first, I think, for sure.
So staying on the database theme, we had another live stream last week from Lorenzo Hidalgo. Apologies, Lorenzo, if I have mispronounced your second name. I am terrible at pronouncing people's names. And it was a talk all about DynamoDB, some different things, different hacks, and different things you can do with DynamoDB, and some things that people might not know about using DynamoDB. And this clip is something that me and Danielle were talking before we came on air about. This is something that both of us learned in this live stream. So let's just see what Lorenzo had to say about speeding up DynamoDB queries.
If you already know the primary keys and sorting keys of all the attributes that you want, you can just use batch get and get 16 megs of data in one request instead of calling query or scan 16 times. You can get them in a single request. So just a cheeky little hack when using batch get.
Batch get? I don't think I even knew that API existed on Dynamo.
Yeah, I think I might have read it in the docs once and then just thought, why would I need this if I have query? Maybe that was why.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it'd be interesting to actually benchmark that. And I don't know if I didn't catch the whole talk, sorry, Lorenzo, but I'd be interested to see if he gets into that, because I guess if you're running a query, you've got one round trip to the database either way. You've got a batch or you've got a query. So yeah, it'd be interesting to actually test that and see what, because like you, I would have just used a query. Where I would have gone, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, not scanned.
Yeah.
Only for severe edge cases.
Yeah, I think it's the number one thing I've both seen people do with Dynamo, and the first thing I tell people not to do with Dynamo is avoid scan at all costs.
If you love giving AWS money, use scan.
I mean, I think when I first, I come from like I said, a relational database background, and I think like a lot of people, I read Alex DeBree's book, the DynamoDB book.
Oh yeah, that's an amazing book.
And it's like such a different way of thinking about databases, and I still haven't quite figured out how to do things like the kind of operation where you would need a scan. Imagine you've got like a products API and you want to list all the products in the database. Whereas in a relational database, you would do select star from products and with some kind of filter. But I've still not yet found the right way to do that in Dynamo when you've got like a list of things and you want to kind of like dynamically search and query and do all that kind of stuff. And maybe that's just a use case that Dynamo's not made for.
Could be. Yeah, I haven't run into needing that. But yeah, now that you mentioned that, it's like, maybe I will in the future.
But yeah, I mean, if you are interested in Dynamo, obviously Lorenzo's talk is amazing. And Alex's book is kind of probably the original source of truth on all things DynamoDB. It's a really, really cool book, and it certainly changed how I think about databases. And yeah, don't use scam, people.
Scan with caution. Yes.
Scan with caution. I like that. Should be a label on the DynamoDB docs. Scan with caution.
Just have a laptop sticker made. Yeah.
Oh, we should have a laptop sticker made. Scan with caution. That'd be a good one.
We believe in serverless laptop stickers.
Yeah.
Try to not get too off topic though. Anyway.
No, but we definitely should. That's an excellent idea. Complete sidebar, but I was doing a webinar last week with Datadog, and I was trying to fill some time. And one of my colleagues at Datadog said, "Why don't you do some serverless jokes to fill the time?" So the best we managed to come up with was, why could the Lambda function not get a US driving license? Because it's stateless. That was the best we got. Yeah. We've just lost every single viewer there, haven't we, listener? Sorry, everybody. Back to the main topic of the
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so not the last live stream of last week. There were 5 live streams last week. I said, and I just picked out 3 clips. But there were also talks from Tico Franklin on building a game server on ECS, and of course Jan Chui on production ready WebSockets. But the last clip I wanted to throw in here is from Alan and Andres talking about AWS AppStudio. So if you missed their live stream last week, they went and tried to see if AWS AppStudio, the new AI app generator, AWS announced at the New York Summit, if you could actually build enterprise-ready apps with AppStudio, because that's one of the claims of AppStudio. So let's see how Alan and Andres gone.
You can build UI without actually knowing React or HTML or anything, really. It just works. You can drag and drop and it works. So I like it from that standpoint. But, is it enterprise? Is it building enterprise grade software? No. I wish we could say yes. I wish I could do this. I wish I could say maybe. But right now, to me, that answer is a hard no. There's no testing. There's no there's no integrated almost anything. It's just
thoughts. Yeah, I mean, I think these Gen AI app builders are. I think that's one of my big challenges with some of these things. Is the day one stuff. Building the software isn't the hard part of building software. It's the day 2. It's the testing, it's the operations, it's all that other stuff, right?
Knowing how the thing works so you can troubleshoot a bug. I was also going to add as well, just looking at like the AppStudio splash page, I always really dislike when marketing includes the word easy, because it might not be easy to folks, and then they'll get extra frustrated. So
yeah, I bet for me, I think you have to be really careful about using words like that, because it's like easy to who, like Kubernetes might not be easy to be in you, but and Lambda possibly wouldn't be easy for someone who's a Kubernetes operator, right? Like there's very different ways of thinking. So yeah, I agree. I think my favorite part of that splash page, and Andres and Alan talked about this, is technical professionals without deep software development skills, such as IT project managers, data engineers, and enterprise architects. I'm like, ooh, burn. Burn to the enterprise architects who don't have software development skills.
Yeah, that was fascinating. And then they had issues with it. They were like, oh, well, I guess I'm not, whatever. Yeah.
I'm an enterprise architect. Of course, I should be able to use this, but I can't.
Yeah, I think it's a problem in marketing anywhere, to be fair. But yeah, it's just like, be careful what you promise, because happiness usually equals like expectations minus the reality, and you don't want the happiness to be negative. And if the expectations are already high, you're kind of setting yourself up for disappointing people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the other things, but I think with some of these, the AI app generator type thing is, I think one of the biggest challenges I've always had building software is actually getting out of the business people who want the software building what the software actually needs to do. Like I've in my experience, people are trying to think the right way to word this. People don't know what they want, right? People don't know what they want. It takes a bit of digging, a bit of questions, a bit of like teasing out the information to find out exactly what it is you want the piece of software to do. So I'd be interested to see how an AI is going to handle that, because if you just type in, XYZ, and it's just going to generate it, and woohoo, off we go.
Yeah, because like you kind of miss the nuance of like a human said they wanted blue, but they really want light blue. Yeah, that's why, like, I don't know. I feel like that's where I become skeptical, but it's possible I'm being overly judgy about it too. So
yeah. I think I'm going to that point with AI as well. It's like everything I'm just like super critical. Whereas
computers do exactly what you tell them, but sometimes what you tell them is not what you really want. And that's why I wonder if you include AI in this, like, is that going to make it better? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see.
Yeah, it's the operational stuff, isn't it? Like if I use any AI app generator, because obviously AppStudio isn't the only one, and this, I don't want this to feel like we're just poo-pooing AppStudio. Like there are other ones out there, and I think these criticisms are probably the same with all of them. like if the app breaks, if I've generated an app with AI and there's a bug, and Amazon CTO, things fail all the time, Werner Vogel's famous quote, and like I'm not sure what the flow would be if the app breaks. How do I debug it? I can't step through
Panic.
the code. Yeah, bring back all the developers. Yeah, I was talking to someone at a user group recently, and we were talking to somebody who was building an AWS app generator.
Okay.
And one of the other guys I was talking to said, "Yeah, what I see happening is that execs are going to see this, fire all the development teams. The development teams are going to go and set up a consultancy that the exec will then need to hire back when the AI app generator that they use doesn't work, and then they need to hire the consultancy back." I'm like, oh yeah, that seems like a win for the developers.
Yeah, I feel like, this kind of goes beyond generative AI, just the whole idea of no code, low code. Like, I think they've been saying that since before I was born of, this low code thing's going to replace developers. And it's a lofty goal, but at the end of the day, a lot of times people want a lot more customization than what platforms like this can allow.
Yeah, I really like. I think it was your blog actually. They're talking about like junior developers as well with all these AI app generators and how that's going to affect junior developers. Was that your blog post, or have I?
Oh yeah, I shared it. It was
great.
a lady named Charity Majors.
Charities
wrote it.
Yeah,
that was a great blog post. People should definitely read that one too.
Yeah, we can find that and pop that in the show notes. So yeah, that is AWS AppStudio. Again, if you are interested in seeing how AppStudio actually works, I think Alan Landers spent about 90 minutes going in it and trying to build an app. And they were using the same app they use for a lot of their live streams to use GPS coordinates and find locations. So it's quite interesting to see just both what it can do, because there were some good things in there. Like there were something like I think you heard at the start of the clip we played, like the UI, the drag and drop UI builder was quite cool and quite easy to use. So yeah, I think there was some good stuff in there.
Yeah, there's always something good about some of these things. So
yeah. Awesome. Well, there were the 3 of the 5 live streams we had last week. Like I said, there are all of the recordings for all these streams are on the YouTube channel, and the links will also be in the show notes. So if you have enjoyed the podcast today, we would really like to see you in the Discord community, which, as well as getting a shout out on this podcast, you will also get to learn from a whole range of different people's experiences. We've got people who are using GCP, who are using Cloudflare, who are using AWS, who are building enterprise apps, startups, everything in between. So if you are interested and you find this helpful, then we'd love to see you in the Discord community. Danielle, thank you for joining me today to record this week's podcast.
Yeah, it was an honor. Thanks for having me.
And thank you everyone for tuning in and listening. We will see you all next time.